I didn't realize I was the third person in someone else's relationship until I was already too deep to walk away. At the beginning, it felt like the opposite of complicated. Felt easy. I met George on a night that wasn't supposed to matter. I had gone out alone, which wasn't something I usually did, but my apartment had been suffocating that week. Too quiet. Too many thoughts. I needed noise, people, anything that wasn't just me and my own head. That's where I saw him. George wasn't loud or trying to get attention, but somehow he had it anyway. He stood at the bar like he owned his space without needing to prove anything. Calm. Collected. The kind of guy you notice even when you're trying not to. I definitely noticed. I just didn't expect him to notice me back. "You're either really bored," he said when I caught him looking at me, "or you're trying to figure out if I'm worth talking to." I laughed, a little caught off guard, and walked over. "Still deciding," I said. "Then you should probably come closer. Easier to judge." That was George. Confident, but not in a way that felt forced. Like he already knew how things were going to go. And somehow he was right. We started talking, and within minutes, it felt like we'd skipped the awkward part entirely. No small talk that dragged. No forced questions. Just flowing conversation like we were picking up something that had already started somewhere else. He was older than me by a couple of years. 24. Worked in design. Lived not too far from the city center. The kind of life that sounded stable but still interesting. I remember thinking he had everything figured out. I remember being wrong about that. By the time we finished our drinks, he leaned in slightly and said, "Let's get out of here." No hesitation. No overthinking. And for some reason, I didn't hesitate either. We walked for a while, just talking, occasionally brushing shoulders like it was accidental, even though it probably wasn't. Felt natural. That's the word I keep coming back to. Natural. Like none of this needed to be questioned. We ended up sitting on a quiet bench, away from the noise. The city was still alive around us, but it felt distant, like we had stepped out of it for a moment. George stretched his arms across the back of the bench, relaxed, then glanced at me. "So," he said, "you always go out alone?" "Only when I'm trying to make questionable decisions." He smirked. "Good. I like being one." I shook my head, but I couldn't help smiling. There was something about him that made everything feel lighter, easier, like whatever was happening didn't come with consequences. And that should have been my first warning. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it quickly, just a flick of his eyes, but I caught it, the slight shift in his expression. Not surprise, recognition. He turned the screen down almost immediately. "You gonna check that?" I asked. "Later." The answer came too fast, too casual. But I didn't push. I should have. Instead, we kept talking. About random things, music, work, stupid childhood stories. The kind of conversation that builds a connection without you even realizing it's happening. At some point, he moved closer. Not obvious. Just enough that our legs brushed. And neither of us moved away. The second time his phone buzzed, it stayed face down. The third time, I couldn't ignore it anymore. "Someone really wants your attention," I said. George let out a quiet breath, like he was debating something internally. Then he picked up the phone. "I'll be right back." He stood up and walked a few steps away, turning slightly so I couldn't see his face clearly. But I saw enough. The way his shoulders tensed for a second. The way his voice dropped. "I told you I'm out." "No, it's not like that. I'll call you later." That last part stuck with me. I don't know why. Maybe because it sounded familiar in a way I couldn't explain. When he came back, he slid back onto the bench like nothing had happened. "Sorry." "It's fine," I said, even though I was already curious. "Who was it?" He didn't hesitate. "Peter. Just a friend." Peter. The name settled somewhere in the back of my mind. I nodded, pretending that was enough of an answer. And maybe it should have been. Except something about the way he said it didn't feel like just a friend. But then his hand brushed mine again. Intentional this time. And whatever doubt had started forming in my head, I let it go. Because in that moment, being close to him felt more important than asking the right questions. I didn't realize yet that those were exactly the questions I should have been asking. I should have asked more about Peter. That's the thing that keeps replaying in my head when I think back to that night. Not the way George looked at me, not the way everything felt so easy, but that one small moment where I had the chance to dig a little deeper. And didn't. Because after that, things moved fast. Too fast. We didn't stay on that bench much longer. George stood up, stretched slightly, then looked down at me with that same calm confidence. "Come on," he said. "Let's go somewhere better." "Better than this?" I asked. He smiled. "Depends what you're looking for." I didn't even pretend to misunderstand what he meant. I followed him. His place wasn't far. About a 10-minute walk, maybe less. We didn't talk as much on the way there, but it wasn't awkward. If anything, it felt more focused, like the conversation had shifted without words. When we got inside, the first thing I noticed was how put together everything was. Clean, minimal, but not cold. Felt lived in, just controlled. Like him. "Make yourself comfortable," he said, tossing his keys onto the counter. I stood there for a second, taking it in. "You always bring strangers home this easily?" He leaned against the wall, watching me. "Only the ones I don't want to let walk away." Yeah. That did something to me. I won't lie. There's a moment right before something shifts where you can still step back. Still decide not to cross that line. I felt that moment, and I ignored it. We started with something simple. Sitting on the couch, talking again like nothing had changed. But everything had. There was less distance now. Less pretending. At some point, his knee pressed against mine. Stayed there. Then his hand. Slow. Not rushed. Like he was giving me time to react. I didn't pull away. I leaned in. And just like that, everything else faded out. The tension, the questions, the small voice in the back of my head telling me something wasn't adding up. Gone. Because being there with him felt real in a way I hadn't expected. Like I wasn't just some random guy he picked up. Like I mattered. That's what got me. Not just the attraction. The attention. The way he looked at me like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I don't know how much time passed. At some point, we were closer than before, conversation reduced to quieter words, half-finished sentences, the kind that don't need to be completed. That's when his phone buzzed again. This time, right next to us on the table. I glanced at it without thinking. Peter. Again. The screen lit up long enough for me to see more this time. A message. "Are you serious right now?" I froze for half a second. George noticed. Of course he did. He picked up the phone quickly, locking the screen before I could read anything else. But it was too late. I had seen enough. "That same friend?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. There was a pause. A small one. But it was there. "Yeah," he said finally. Just yeah. Nothing more. I watched him for a second, waiting. He didn't add anything. Instead, he just set the phone down again and looked back at me like he was trying to pull my attention away from it. "Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it." That should have been the second warning. Maybe the biggest one. Because people don't say that unless there's something to worry about. But instead of pushing, instead of asking the obvious question, "Why does your friend sound like that?" I let it go. Again. Because he moved closer. Because his hand found mine again. Because in that moment, I wanted him more than I wanted answers. And that's how it starts. Not with a big mistake. Just small decisions. Ignoring things. Letting things slide. Telling yourself it's not a big deal. I didn't know it yet, but I had already stepped into something that wasn't just about me and George. Peter wasn't just a name on a screen. He was already part of this. I just didn't understand how much yet. I should have left after that message. Not dramatically. Not in some big confrontational way. Just pulled back. Asked a few more questions. Slowed things down. But I didn't. Because George had this way of redirecting everything. The second I started thinking about Peter, he pulled me right back into him, his hand on my neck. His voice lower now. Closer. Like whatever was happening between us mattered more than anything else. And in that moment, it did. Or at least it felt like it did. I ended up staying the night. I didn't plan to. I don't think I even decided it consciously. It just happened. One minute we were on the couch, the next I was in his room, and after that, Time blurred in that way it does when you stop paying attention to anything except the person in front of you. Felt intense. Not rushed. Not careless. Intentional. Like he knew exactly what he was doing and I was just following. At some point, much later, everything finally slowed down. We were lying there in the dark, the city lights barely coming through the window, the room quiet except for our breathing. That's usually the moment where reality comes back in, where things settle, where you start thinking again. I turned my head slightly, looking at him. George was on his back, one arm behind his head, the other resting loosely on his chest. Calm, like nothing had shifted for him. "Do you always do this?" I asked quietly. He glanced at me. "Do what?" "This," I said. "Pick someone up and this." There was a pause. Not long, but enough. "Not always," he said. Not a denial. Not really an answer either. I studied his face in the low light, trying to read something more in it. "You're hard to figure out," I added. That made him smile slightly. "Maybe you're just overthinking. Maybe. Or maybe I wasn't thinking enough." His phone buzzed again. I didn't even have to look this time. We both knew who it was. George didn't reach for it immediately. He just stared at the ceiling for a second, like he was deciding something. Then he exhaled quietly and grabbed it. This time, he didn't leave the room. He just sat up on the edge of the bed, back turned slightly toward me. "Yeah," he said, voice low. A pause. "No, I told you I'm not." Another pause. Longer this time. His shoulders tensed. "I'm not doing this right now, Peter." My chest tightened. Not because I heard everything, but because I heard enough. Not just what he said. How he said it. This wasn't casual. This wasn't just some random friend being annoying. There was weight there. History. Something unresolved. I sat up slightly behind him, the sheet slipping down my waist, suddenly very aware of the situation in a way I hadn't been before. "You're overreacting," George continued, quieter now. Then, after a few seconds, I said, "I'll talk to you later." He hung up, just like that. No goodbye. No explanation. Just ended it. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The room felt different now. Not tense exactly, but not as easy as before. George ran a hand through his hair, then turned back toward me like he was trying to reset everything. "Sorry," he said. Again. That same word. Same tone. Like it was enough. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at him. "Doesn't sound like just a friend," I said finally. There it was. The question I should have asked hours ago. George held my gaze. For a moment, I thought he might actually answer honestly. Instead, he leaned back slightly, expression unreadable. "It's complicated." Of course it was. I let out a quiet breath, looking away for a second. "That usually means something." "It means," he said, a little sharper now, "that it's not something I want to get into right now. That hit differently. Not aggressive, but firm. Like a boundary. And I didn't know if I was crossing it or if I had already crossed into something I didn't fully understand. I should have stopped there, gotten dressed, left, cleared my head. But I didn't, because a second later his hand touched my arm again. Softer this time. "Hey," he said, quieter. "Don't make it weird. Don't make it weird." I almost laughed at that, because something was weird. I just couldn't fully see it yet. And instead of pushing back, I nodded. "Yeah," I said. "It's fine." It wasn't. But I told myself it was. Because staying felt easier than leaving. Because I wanted whatever this was to be real. Because I still believed I was just getting to know someone. Not stepping into the middle of something that had already existed long before me. I didn't know it yet. But I wasn't just involved with George. I was already involved with Peter too. I just hadn't met him yet. I didn't expect to meet Peter so soon. Honestly, I thought he'd stay just a name. A vague complication I could ignore as long as George didn't force me to look at it too closely. But things don't work like that. Not when you're already in deeper than you realize. Morning felt normal. Too normal. I woke up before George, the light creeping through the curtains just enough to pull me out of sleep. For a second, I didn't move. Just lay there, trying to piece together where I was, what had happened, and why my chest felt heavier than it should have. Then I turned my head. George was still asleep, one arm thrown lazily across the bed. His face relaxed in a way I hadn't seen the night before. He looked different like that, softer, less guarded. And for a second, I let myself believe that what happened between us wasn't just a moment, that maybe it meant something more, that maybe Peter really was just complicated background noise. I got up quietly, pulling on my clothes, trying not to wake him. I didn't want to overstay, didn't want to turn this into something awkward. But just as I was about to leave the room, his voice cut through the silence. "You're leaving already?" I turned. He was awake now, watching me. "Didn't want to wake you," I said. He pushed himself up slightly, running a hand through his hair. "You could have stayed." There was something in his tone. Not casual, not distant, something that made it harder to walk away. "I've got stuff to do," I replied, even though I didn't. He studied me for a second, like he was deciding whether to push or let it go. Then he nodded. "All right," just like that. No argument, no pressure. And somehow, that almost made it worse. We exchanged numbers before I left. Of course we did. And as I walked out of his apartment, I told myself this was fine, that I'd see him again, that whatever weirdness with Peter was, it didn't have to involve me. I was wrong. It happened 2 days later. George texted me first. "You around tonight?" Simple, casual, like nothing had happened, like everything was normal. I hesitated for maybe a minute before replying. "Yeah." That was all it took. He told me to meet him at a cafe. Not a bar this time, not his place. Somewhere neutral. I didn't think much of it. If anything, I took it as a good sign. Like maybe he actually wanted to talk. To make this something more than just a one-night thing. I got there a little early. Sat down. Waited. Checked my phone more times than I'd admit. And then, I saw him. George walked in like he always did. Calm. Confident. Like he already knew exactly where I was sitting before he even looked. But he wasn't alone. That's when everything shifted. Peter didn't look like what I expected. I don't know what I did expect exactly. Something more intense, maybe. More obvious. But he wasn't. He looked normal. Too normal. About the same age as George. Maybe a little older. Dark hair, sharp eyes, the kind that don't just look at you, they read you. And the second those eyes landed on me, I felt it. Recognition. Not like he knew me personally, but like he already knew enough. George stopped at the table, glancing between us. There was a brief moment. A pause. Like even he wasn't entirely sure how this was going to go. "This is Peter," he said finally. Just like that. No explanation. No context. Just a name I had already heard too many times. Peter didn't smile. Didn't offer his hand. He just looked at me for a second longer than necessary. Then said, "So you're the one. Not hi. Not nice to meet you. Just that." My stomach tightened. "I guess," I said, unsure what that even meant. George exhaled quietly, already looking slightly tense. "Can we not do this right now?" he muttered. Peter ignored him. His attention stayed on me, and there was something in his expression that made everything click into place in a way I hadn't been ready for. "You didn't tell him?" Peter asked, eyes flicking briefly to George. George didn't answer. That silence said enough. Peter let out a short, almost amused breath, shaking his head slightly. "Of course you didn't." My chest felt tight. "What didn't he tell me?" I asked, looking between them. This was it. The moment where everything that felt off finally started making sense. George rubbed his face, clearly irritated now. "It's not like that," he said. Peter laughed quietly. "It's exactly like that." Then he looked at me again. And this time, there was no ambiguity in his voice. "We're together." The words hit harder than I expected. Simple, direct, final. And suddenly, everything from that night, the calls, the messages, the tension in George's voice, it all clicked. I wasn't just some random guy he met. I was the problem. Or worse, I was the secret. I looked at George, waiting, hoping he'd say something. Deny it. explain it, fix it. But he didn't. And that was my answer. I had walked into something I didn't understand. And now I was sitting right in the middle of it, whether I wanted to be or not. I wish I could say I handled it well, that I stood up, said something smart, walked away with dignity. But the truth? I just sat there, like an idiot, trying to process something that suddenly felt way bigger than I had signed up for. We're together. Peter's words kept echoing in my head. I looked at George again, waiting for him to correct it, to say it's not that simple, to explain anything. But he didn't. He just sat there, jaw tight, like this whole situation was annoying rather than completely messed up. That's not, George started, then stopped, exhaling sharply. It's complicated. There it was again. That word. Complicated. Except now it didn't feel vague anymore. Now it felt like a warning I had ignored. Peter let out a quiet laugh, leaning back slightly in his chair. You really love that word, don't you? George shot him a look. Can you not? No, Peter said calmly. I actually can't. Not when you're sitting here acting like this is something new. My chest tightened. Wait, I said, finally finding my voice. What does that mean? Peter's eyes moved back to me, and for the first time there was something softer there. Not kindness exactly, but understanding, like he knew exactly how this felt. Look, he said, more measured now. I'm not blaming you. That caught me off guard. I didn't know, I said quickly. I swear, I didn't. I know, he cut in. And the worst part? I believed him, because his frustration wasn't really directed at me. It was aimed entirely at George. You didn't tell him anything, did you? Peter said, looking back at him. George leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, clearly tense now. I was going to. When? Peter asked. After what? A week? A month? It hasn't even been that long, George snapped. That's not the point. The tension between them was heavy, not explosive, not dramatic, just deep, like this wasn't their first argument. Not even close. I felt like I shouldn't be there, like I had accidentally walked into something private. Something that had nothing to do with me, except it did, because I was sitting right in the middle of it. So what is this then? I asked quieter now. You're together, but you're also. I didn't even know how to finish that sentence. George rubbed his face again, frustrated. It's not exclusive, he said. I blinked. What? Peter scoffed. Yeah, that's what he tells himself. That's what we agreed, George shot back. Peter leaned forward slightly, his expression sharpening. No, that's what you wanted. Don't twist it. The air felt heavier with every second. I looked between them, trying to understand. So, you're together? I said slowly. But you see other people? George nodded like that simplified everything. Peter didn't. It's not that simple, he said. Of course it wasn't. Nothing about this was simple. I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling. Okay. But then why does it feel like I just walked into something I wasn't supposed to be part of? Silence. That was the answer. George looked at me then. Really looked at me. And for the first time since I met him, he didn't seem completely in control of the situation. I didn't plan it like this, he said. Peter laughed under his breath. You never do. George ignored him. I like you, he added, quieter now. That messed with me more than everything else. Because I could tell he meant it. And that made everything worse. Peter watched that exchange carefully, then shook his head slightly. Of course you do, he muttered. There was no jealousy in his voice. That's what surprised me. Just exhaustion. Like he'd seen this before. I'm not doing this again, Peter said, standing up suddenly. George looked up at him. Peter. No, he cut him off. You figure out what you want. I'm not going to sit here and pretend this is fine. Then his eyes flicked to me one last time. And this time there was something there. Not anger, not blame, just a quiet warning. Be careful, he said. And then he left. I sat there in silence after that. The chair across from me empty. the weight of everything finally settling in. I looked at George. You were just not gonna tell me? He didn't answer right away. And honestly, that hurt more than anything he could have said. I didn't think it mattered yet, he said finally. I let out a short, disbelieving laugh. Didn't matter? He leaned forward again. I didn't want to mess this up before it even started. That's exactly what you did. That came out sharper than I expected. But I didn't take it back. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said quietly, "Are you leaving?" I looked at him, at the guy I had felt so drawn to just days ago. And for the first time, I hesitated, because now I understood what I had stepped into. This wasn't just something casual. This wasn't just us. This was something already broken. Something I was now a part of, whether I wanted to be or not. And I still didn't know if I was ready to walk away. I didn't leave. And yeah, that probably says more about me than I'd like to admit, because I knew exactly what this was now. I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't guessing. I wasn't filling in gaps with assumptions. I knew, and I still stayed. I don't know, I said honestly. George watched me carefully, like he was trying to figure out which way I was going to go. Stay, he said quietly. Not demanding, not desperate, just certain, like he believed I would. And the worst part? I almost did without thinking. Why? I asked instead. That seemed to catch him off guard. What do you mean? Why should I stay? I said, holding his gaze now. Give me one reason that isn't just this. I gestured vaguely between us. The tension, the attraction, all the things that had pulled me in from the start. George leaned back slightly, studying me. You didn't feel it? He asked. Of course I did. That was the problem. I did, I admitted. But clearly I wasn't the only one in the picture. His jaw tightened slightly. It's not like that. I let out a breath. You keep saying that, but it is like that. For the first time, he didn't argue right away. He just looked down at the table, running his thumb along the edge like he was thinking. Peter and I, he started, then paused. I waited. He doesn't want to let go, George said finally. That didn't sit right with me. That's not what it looked like, I replied. George looked back up, something sharper in his eyes now. You saw 5 minutes of a situation you don't understand. Then explain it to me. Silence. Again. That was becoming a pattern. He knew what this was, George said after a moment. From the beginning. What this was. I asked. A relationship that isn't. He searched for the word. Restricted. I almost laughed. Except he clearly doesn't see it that way. George didn't answer that. And he didn't need to. I leaned back in my chair, running a hand over my face. This was messy. Way messier than anything I had ever been part of. And the worst part? I wasn't just observing it anymore. I was in it. So what happens now? I asked. George didn't hesitate this time. That depends on you. Of course it did. He was putting it on me. Like I was the one choosing what this became. But he was the one who had already built the situation. I had just walked into it. You're okay with this? I asked. With whatever this is? Yes, he said simply. I studied him. You don't feel like you're hurting him? That made him pause. Just for a second. Then, he'll be fine. I didn't believe that. Not after the way Peter looked at him. Not after the way he looked at me. And me, I added. George frowned slightly. What about you? That's the thing, I said quietly. I don't even know what I am in this. That landed. I could see it. Because for the first time, he didn't have an answer. The silence stretched between us. Longer this time. He wasn't deflecting anymore. Wasn't redirecting. He was actually thinking. And that made something in my chest tighten. Because it meant he hadn't thought about it before. Not really. I like being with you, he said finally. It was honest, simple, and completely insufficient. That's not enough, I replied. He exhaled slowly. I'm not asking you for anything serious. There it was. That stung more than I expected. Because for a second, I thought maybe this was more than that. but hearing him say it out loud clarified everything. So I'm just what? I said. Something extra? That's not how I see it. But that's what it is. He didn't argue this time, because again, he couldn't. I looked down at the table, then back at him. I don't think I can do that. The words felt heavier than they should have. But also, right, for the first time since all of this started, something felt clear. George leaned forward slightly. Are you sure? I nodded. Yeah. Another pause. Then he asked, quieter this time. Even if you want to? That hit. Because I did. I still did. And that was the hardest part. I swallowed, forcing myself to hold his gaze. Wanting something doesn't mean it's a good idea. A small, almost amused breath left him. Since when are you that rational? Since 5 minutes ago, I said. That actually made him smile a little. And that almost broke my resolve. For a second, neither of us moved. Then I stood up. Slowly. Like if I rushed it, I might change my mind. George watched me the whole time. Didn't stop me. Didn't reach for me. Which somehow made it harder. I meant what I said, he added. I paused. About what? I like you. I nodded slightly. I know. And I believed him. That was never the issue. The issue was everything else. I turned and started toward the door. Heart heavier than I expected. Head louder than it had been in days. And just before I stepped out, he said my name. I stopped. Didn't turn around. This doesn't have to be the end, he said. I closed my eyes for a second. Because part of me wanted to believe that. Wanted to turn back. Wanted to stay in something that felt good. Even if it wasn't right. But I didn't. I think it does, I said quietly. And then I walked out. I thought that was it. That I had made the hard choice and closed the door on something that could have gotten way more complicated. But I was wrong. Because I hadn't heard the last of either of them. Especially Peter. I didn't expect Peter to text me. Honestly, I didn't even know how he got my number. That's what made it worse. It happened the next evening. I was home, trying to distract myself with anything music, scrolling, even cleaning just to avoid replaying everything in my head. But it kept coming back. George's voice, Peter's expression, that moment at the cafe where everything shifted from simple to whatever this was. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. Then I opened it. You left. I stared at the screen for a second. No name. But I already knew. Peter. I hesitated before replying. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wasn't sure if I should say anything at all. Still, I typed. Yeah. A few seconds passed. Then, good. That made me frown. Good. There was a longer pause this time. Then, means you're not stupid. I almost laughed at that. Almost. Could have told me that in person. I typed. 3 dots appeared immediately. Then disappeared. Then appeared again. Like he was thinking about what to say. Wouldn't have mattered. I leaned back against the couch, exhaling. He wasn't wrong. At that moment in the cafe, I probably wouldn't have listened. Why are you texting me? I asked. This time, the reply came slower. Because I know how this goes. That caught my attention. Meaning, another pause. Longer. Then, you leave. He gives you space. Then he texts you again like nothing happened. My chest tightened slightly. Because that sounded exactly like something George would do. And you start thinking maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe you overreacted. I swallowed. Did that happen to you? The typing dots stayed for a while this time. Then finally, more than once. That shifted something. Because up until now, Peter had just been the other guy. The complication. The problem. But suddenly, he felt real. So what are you doing? I asked. Warning me. Something like that. I ran a hand through my hair, staring at the screen. You don't even know me. The reply came almost instantly. I don't have to. I frowned. That's a little dramatic. No, he wrote. It's predictable. I didn't like how accurate that felt. So what, I just stay away? I asked. There was a pause. Then, that's what I should have done. That hit harder than anything else he'd said. Because it didn't sound bitter. Sounded honest. I stared at that message for a long time. Then finally typed, "Why didn't you?" This time the pause stretched. Long enough that I thought he might not answer. Then, "Because I thought I was different." Yeah. That one stayed with me. I didn't reply right away. Didn't know how to. Because if I was being honest, a part of me had already been thinking the same thing. That maybe what I had with George wasn't the same as whatever they had. That maybe I wouldn't end up in the same place. My phone buzzed again. Another message. "Just don't lie to yourself." I exhaled slowly. That was fair. I locked my phone, tossing it onto the couch beside me. Tried to sit with everything for a second. But my head was louder than ever now. Because Peter wasn't just warning me. He was showing me where this could go. And the worst part? I could already see it. Too clearly. My phone buzzed again. I didn't even need to check to know who it was this time. George. Of course. I picked it up slowly. One message. "Hey." Just that. Nothing more. Like nothing had happened. Like yesterday didn't exist. I let out a quiet, almost disbelieving laugh. Then glanced at Peter's last message again. "Just don't lie to yourself." I looked back at George's text. Thumb hovering over the screen. Because this was the moment Peter was talking about. The exact moment. Where everything could reset. Where I could pretend it wasn't that complicated. Where I could go back. And for a second, I almost did. But then I put the phone down. Didn't reply. Not yet. Because for the first time since all of this started, I was actually thinking about what I wanted. Not just what felt good in the moment. And I wasn't sure yet if George was worth becoming the third person in his story. Or if I was finally ready to step out of it completely. I didn't reply that night. Or the next morning. George texted again. "You're really gonna ignore me? Then, at least say something." I read both messages. Didn't answer. Not because I was trying to play games. But because for the first time since I met him, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. It's weird how quiet things get when you step back. No tension. No late night overthinking about what someone meant. No waiting for your phone to buzz. Just space. And in that space, everything started to make more sense. Not clearer in a comforting way. Clearer in a "this was never going to work" kind of way. 2 days later, he called. I stared at the screen while it rang. Let it ring out. Then he called again. That time, I picked up. I don't know why. Maybe I needed closure. Or maybe I just wanted to hear his voice one more time. "Hey," he said. Same tone. Same calm confidence. Like nothing had changed. "Hey," I replied. There was a short pause. "You're avoiding me." Straight to the point. "Yeah." Another pause. At least I wasn't pretending. "Why?" he asked. I let out a quiet breath. "You really don't know?" "I want to hear you say it." Of course he did. "Because I don't want to be part of something like that," I said. Silence. Then, "It's not as bad as you think." I almost smiled. Not because it was funny. Because it was predictable. "Peter already explained how it works," I said. That made him pause. "He texted you?" "Yeah." A beat. "What did he say?" I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "Enough." George exhaled. "You're really gonna take his side?" "That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" I closed my eyes for a second. "It's me deciding I don't want to be in the middle of something that already has problems." That landed. I could hear it in the silence. "It's not broken," he said after a moment. I didn't argue. I didn't need to. "Maybe not to you." Another pause. Longer this time. Then, quieter. "I meant what I said. I know. I like you." There it was again. And it still worked. That same pull. That same feeling that made everything harder than it should have been. "But that's not enough," I said. His breath hitched slightly. Barely noticeable. But I heard it. "So that's it?" he asked. I swallowed. "Yeah. You're just done." I hesitated. Because the honest answer? I didn't feel done. I just knew I should be. "I think I have to be." That was the closest I could get to the truth. He didn't speak for a few seconds. Then, "You're gonna regret it." Not in a threatening way. Not even in an arrogant way. Just certain. Like he believed that. "Maybe," I said, and I meant it. Because walking away didn't feel good. It didn't feel like a win. It felt like losing something that could have been something. But I think I'd regret staying more. That was the part that mattered. Silence again. Then finally, "Okay." Just that. No fight. No convincing. No last attempt. And somehow that made it real in a way nothing else had. "Take care," he added. "You too." And then the call ended. I sat there for a while after that. Phone still in my hand. Room quiet. Everything still. I didn't text Peter. He didn't text me again either. We didn't need to. That conversation had already said everything. A few weeks passed. Life went back to normal. Or at least something close to it. I went out again. Met new people. Nothing as intense. Nothing as immediate. And honestly, that was probably a good thing. Sometimes I still think about George. About how easy it felt at the start. How quickly it pulled me in. How hard it was to walk away. And yet, a small part of me still wonders what would have happened if I stayed. But then I remember the cafe. Peter's voice. "We're together." And the way everything shifted in that moment. That wasn't my story to be part of. It never was. I just walked into it for a while. Stayed longer than I should have. And then finally, I walked out. And this time, I didn't look back.